What's happening to these characters? They're dying of cancer, right? So they have to come face to face with some of these big issues. And as much as he wants to avoid it, I think that's very ironic in this larger backdrop, is you can't avoid cancer. And certainly, whether you have cancer or not, none of us in this room can avoid death.
The fact that he thinks that he wins if there is a God shows that he hasn't investigated or researched at all.
Right, I win either way. Really? Because if God does exist, he doesn't say you win either way. So you better come to grips with that. I had a very interesting conversation with a good friend of mine who grew up in a church, was a Christian, married a Christian gal, and then as he went to college, he kind of came out of the closet in terms of faith and said, I don't believe anymore. And he was an agnostic at best or an atheist. And we got into that discussion. What happens when you die? And he admitted that it's a pretty bleak prospect, you know. I said, well, as you as an atheist, how do you deal with that? He says, I just choose not to think about it. It's like, okay, that's certainly an option. I don't think that that option is intellectually responsible, but you can certainly choose to ignore some of these bigger questions, okay? And yeah, I don't spend all of my time thinking about that while I'm playing Legos with my kids or going to a soccer game or whatever. But I better be thinking about it at some point, and I better be thinking about it before it's too late to where, you know, decisions have already been made. Did you have something?
Nicholson's character used the word, I resist all belief. The word resist gives an implication that somehow, some way he's been dealt with or prompted to deal with that idea and has resisted the idea of going down the path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, resistance assumes some kind of willful choice, right? I willfully choose not to walk this path. I'm going to walk this path. Yeah, and there's a lot of people, a lot of us, that resist the right path from time to time. Now, the interesting thing about this movie is that as it plays along, you begin to see the outworkings of these two worldviews. Fascinating film. I mean, it's well done. The acting is fantastic. Lots of good humor. But at the end of the day, if you scrape all that back, there is a fascinating message that I think is very in line with biblical truth. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Not just biblical truth, because I don't necessarily want to go all the way there yet, but I want to just start with the concept of truth. We live in a culture that's increasingly resistant to truth. Okay? There's a lot of people that say, live your own way, think what you want to think. If it kind of feels good, do it. If you love somebody, then you should be able to marry them, regardless of any traditional mores about who should marry whom and so forth. Okay? We hear that a lot, and it's all within the context of tolerance, progressiveness. Okay? We need to be progressive, therefore we need to be tolerant. We need to pursue equality and justice and all these kinds of things. But I don't hear a lot of people, or certainly enough people, thinking through what do we actually mean by all of this. And there's a quote at the beginning of your handout this morning that is actually from an article written by Alicia Kaufman, and it's an article about G.K. Chesterton, who was a very, very famous Christian writer from Britain at the early part of the 20th century, late part of the 19th century. And so he was describing his own journey to faith, and he says, Alicia Kaufman says this, in short, the trendy philosophers who urged people to question everything could not themselves answer the most basic question, so why should I listen to you? You see the inherent irony there, right? We live in a culture where they have increasingly heard the message or promoted the message, hey, live however you see fit. I've probably used this illustration before, but it bears repeating. Just a couple of years ago, there was this massive scandal at Harvard University. Didn't get a lot of press. There were over 100 students, freshman students, who had cheated on a take-home exam. And so now Harvard is embroiled in this massive controversy, and they have to decide if they need to come up with a student honor code for the first time in their 400-plus year history. Ironically, the motto of Harvard is Veritas, Does anybody know what veritas means? Yeah, Latin for truth. So there was this massive scandal. And I sat and I read about all this and I filtered it all through and I thought, you know, this is supremely ironic. That for generation upon generation, not only, first of all, has Harvard moved away from its strongly Christian roots in its founding, but it continues to move in this progressive direction. So that we're challenging generation of students to resist the idea of absolute truth, to do as you see fit, situational ethics, moral relativity, and then we wake up one day surprised that the students were actually paying attention in class. So they take home a take-home test and decide to cheat because it works for them, right? Which begs the question, if we have been promoting this message, then why are we punishing them for carrying it out in the real life? We shouldn't be. We should actually be applauding them for doing what seems to work for them. But we don't. We don't. And that is one of those little clues to perhaps the idea that there's something more going on in the world. Well, as Christians, we say that something more is the law of God written on our hearts. The idea of a conscience, okay? That there is a certain standard by which we should live. Now, to get us into this discussion today, I have a case study on the first page there, and many of you have probably heard this case study before, but this is a question that needs to be wrestled with as we think about this idea of truth. There were a group of friends in a cafe. This is a true scenario. This happened. A group of friends were sitting in a cafe discussing a book that the group had been reading just recently called Time for Truth by Os Guinness. Now, if you don't know anything about Os Guinness is a very prolific writer. He is a strong Christian leader. He's actually from England and the UK, but he lives here and has an organization called the Trinity Forum out on the East Coast. In this book, near the beginning, Os Guinness writes this: "In each generation, the price of lying is pegged to the price of truth, which means that both are held cheaply today. I am not arguing the absolutist position that lying is always wrong, for in a world like ours, it is sometimes essential. There are numerous morally permissible lies. In the opening chapters of Exodus, for example, the Hebrew midwives lied to Pharaoh to save their baby boys from death. As Winston Churchill said after the Tehran Conference in 1943 about Allied secrecy over plans to invade Europe, quote, 'Truth is so precious that she must be attended by a bodyguard of lies,' unquote." As you might imagine, in this discussion, this quote was brought up and it became very animated and passionate as the group wrestled through this question that I want to put to us today. Is it ever morally permissible to lie? Okay, is it ever morally permissible to lie? What do you think, Jim? Okay. Okay. So you say no. Why?
Just because of the implications of telling that lie. Same way with these up here in Exodus and what Churchill said. We don't really know what the implications of that line was. Might have saved lives, but God still abhors lying.
Okay. Okay. So in your case, you say no because of the ripple effect or the implications of telling that lie.
And it was an absolute truth in our family that we shared.
Okay, and part of it had to do with the way that you were raised. Okay, good. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm going to say yes.
That there are morally permissible lies?
In the military, you are sworn to keep some secrets, depending on what position you're in. And what do you do to protect those secrets?
Okay, all right. So you're giving the context of, and this is something that Os Guinness alluded to, and in the backdrop of kind of World War II, is that in the military, you are given certain secrets, and it's at what length do you go to protect those secrets for a greater good. Would that be fair to say, greater good? Okay. All right, anybody else? Mike.
In order to keep your faith, if somebody asks you that you're a Christian, if you're killed for it, I would say yes. You shouldn't lie.
Okay, okay. So in the context of your faith and whether or not somebody put a gun to your head, and you shouldn't lie in that situation. If that means that you die, then you die. Or lose your job or something less significant than death. Right. Okay. What about the classic example? Classic example, as long as we're talking about World War II, okay? You're living in Poland under the regime of advance of Nazi Germany. You're hiding Jews in your home, and the SS comes to your door and says, "Are you hiding Jews in your home? We're here to get them." Is it morally permissible to lie in a scenario like that? What do you think? Yes.
I agree with Jim. I was raised the same way, but after reading the book about being a tramp for God by Corey Ten Boom, I came to the conclusion that being right is not always right.
Being right is not always right. What do you mean by that?
The right thing to do would be to tell the truth. But that's going to cause 30 people down in the basement to die.
Okay.
And so I was right and I didn't lie, but I was wrong in that I got these people killed.
So what's right? And that's the question, right? Is that on the one hand, I'm right by not lying, but by not lying, then people die. If I tell the truth, yes, there are Jews in my basement, then 30 Jews or however many die. And that's wrong. That's the way we're thinking of it, right? Yes.
I think about Revelation 21:8.
Okay.
It says, all liars shall have their part laid with the breath of fire, brimstone. I struggle with that. I mean that's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's any real moral deviation from that that's acceptable.
Okay. Yeah, there are consequences to lying in Scripture, right? Consequences to lying. And that's why this is a tough tension. That's why this is so tough, right? Okay.
So I think we don't give God enough credit for doing something. If we are obeying Him and telling the truth, then why are we not trusting in Him to take care of whatever it is that we need done?
Okay. You're raising another important perspective, and that is trust in God. Do I trust that God can handle this situation? It might not look, the outcome might not look like what I would prefer it to be, but God's in play here too, and I can't dismiss that. Okay, good, yes?
Well, once your lie is exposed, then it affects your credibility of other people's views, and then from that point, there is no belief in anything that you say.
Okay, now you're saying once your lie is exposed, it affects your credibility because it's a trust issue, right, if you're going to lie about that. You could make the counter-argument that once my lie is exposed, yes, I did say a lie here, but I also saved 30 people. Especially in our culture today. That would be a moral good, a positive outcome to you making that compromise in your lie. Right? I get what you're saying. I'm saying that there's another perspective on this that people would go, what do you mean? Because the reverse would go back to what you're saying. You said, oh, no, I can't tell a lie, and then you had 30 people killed because all of a sudden you're going to get up on your moral high horse, and you know what I mean? It's a difficult thing. Let's go here and then Denny.
Yeah. Biblically, Rahab lied and was not glorified. She was honored in Hebrews 11 for that action.
Okay. Let's talk about that for a second.